Welcome to this retrospective slash review for Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2. And I just want to give you hopefully a pretty quick synopsis of my thoughts on the game while I run through it in the background. Hopefully I can keep my focus long enough so I don't get off track too badly. But I guess let me go ahead and start with some of the obvious factors. The the visuals and the audio. I feel like the in that department, things are pretty much almost identical to the first Curse of the Moon game. Very similar, really. Um, I mean, if anything, I do think the graphics were slightly improved in some parts, um, but if it was an improvement, it was only slightly. The sound, I'd say the sound was actually improved too. Probably a little bit more of an improvement on the sound area than in the graphical area, but I would say it's a better improvement, but not anything that I would say was a drastic improvement. But I mean, I think it is a noticeable improvement in the sound department. So there's that to basically keep in mind. Stupid, stupid cat. Anyway, um, the game I feel was probably a noticeable improvement over the first Curse of the Moon, and most importantly, I think one of the areas that they improved the most on was the difficulty, because that was something I think pretty much the majority of people, not even just myself, but the majority of players of the first Curse of the Moon were probably critical of, was the fact that it was pretty much, a cakewalk. The entire game was a cakewalk. I would say that the first episode in this game wasn't actually difficult. I mean, I think I had the most problems with stage 7 and just the stage itself. But the actual bosses, I didn't have a problem with pretty much any of them, really. I'm trying to think, did the end game boss really give me any hard time? Honestly, I can't remember. And if I did have to play the end game boss, it probably wasn't as many times as I had to play a lot of the other bosses in later episodes. So I'd say, at least from the perspective of episode 1, there was there was a I wouldn't say a decent upgrade in challenge, but it was a noticeable increase in challenge. Where things kind of went a little bit too extreme was the fact that when you had to go play episode 2, the challenge was ramped up significantly, almost to the point where in some areas it was nearly rage-inducing, really. So I do feel that the increased difficulty was a good thing, but at the same time they went a little bit overboard with it in episodes 2 and the final episode. And my assumption is they're probably just as difficult on episode EX, which I haven't played yet, but they're probably just as bad on episode EX as they are in those episodes. But I don't know that for an absolute fact. And I do think that that increase in difficulty for the later episodes is probably a little bit not my favorite thing, really. So I think they probably went a little bit too hard in the difficulty portion for later episodes. And another criticism I would have of the game is the fact that to get the entire story of the game, I actually don't mind playing the game multiple times to get the full story, but it just seemed a bit excessive to have to go through the same 7 stages for the most part, and there'd be literally no difference between any of the stages, and you're just doing them all over again. Um, Actually, yeah, in the later episodes, the only real change was in the bosses. Oops, that was silly of me. But the bosses were substantially more difficult, whereas the stages themselves actually ended up becoming much more easy. So I feel that it got to be monotonous is the best way of putting it. I feel if you were going to have that many a whole bunch of episodes to play through, that'd be perfectly fine. But they should have swapped up the stages, or just introduced more variety, I guess, because the amount of variety in the stages just became a bit stagnant, after the first episode. Um, and I do feel that is a bit of a drawback, or it's pretty significant drawback, to be honest with you. I'm trying to think. I don't really think that there's any reason why they couldn't have come up with any new stages. But I mean, because there were new stages, actually. I mean, the uh, the moon stage was completely different after all. Um, so I just felt they could have done a better job with changing up the actual stages themselves a little bit for the later episodes, but they didn't. So it is what it is. I do like the fact in the final episode, however, they did introduce the fact that you get to have your entire team from the original Curse of the Moon and Curse of the Moon 2 all together again. That was actually really neat, and something I did quite enjoy, to be honest with you. Um, all the characters were pretty pretty useful. They all had a lot of utility. I feel like Alfred is still one of those characters that probably has the least amount of utility, outside of a few spells and very situational um, instances. I mean, for taking on bosses, his lightning spell is actually very helpful, but the fire shield is pretty good too. But it's not one of those things that I'm going to consciously think about using unless it's something that I had to, like to get the health upgrade in the lava stage in the final episode. And it's just one of those things that didn't really dawn on me because it's not something I would think to use on a regular basis. Um, all the other characters, though, they all had a lot of really good, I would say, like I said, utility, but also at the same time, a very unique feel to all of them. They didn't feel like retreads of each other. For instance, Dominique here, who is basically Miriam as far as the jumping ability, but outside of the jumping ability, she plays very differently than Miriam and has a much more unique feel. The fact that she can heal you, and obviously I made use of the healing aspect quite a bit. Um, but the healing and being able to attack upwards makes her a very unique character, not just basically a better version of Zangetsu, which is kind of what Miriam was in the first game, really. Um, Robert, I felt like, is probably one of my favorite characters. Actually, at the end of the day, I just felt like he was such a versatile character, and I was able to get through a lot of stuff. Even though he had very low HP, I still felt like he was just probably one of my favorite characters in the game, really. Um, and I like pretty much all the characters, like I said, especially my good boy, Mr. Hachi. But at the end of the day, I think having the entire cast and crew there for the final episode was definitely a very unique touch. But I just wish they had probably switched up the stages a lot more than they did. So at the end of the day, I would say this game is definitely a marked improvement over the first Curse of the Moon, but it also kind of went a little bit overboard in a lot of areas. And if they do come out with the Curse of the Moon 3, I hope they try to address some of that stuff. Like the difficulty, I don't actually have a problem with, but it needs to be a little bit more fair than what was presented here in a lot of areas. Because, I don't know, some of the difficulty felt like they were being difficult just to be difficult, I guess is, it, it didn't feel rewarding, I guess is the best way of putting it. Oh, well, I mean, actually, if you think about it, maybe it was pretty good, actually. Kind of like an older game on the Genesis or something, basically. Okay, maybe I can't criticize him too much on the difficulty thing, but it is what it is. It is definitely one of those things that's far more difficult than the first game, to be fair. And I think that's probably the biggest complaint a lot of players have with this game is how much more difficult it is. So probably not ramp up the difficulty as much as they did in this game. But not dumb it down to the original Curse of the Moon's difficulty. So they need to get a little bit of that Goldilocks just right difficulty thing if they do come out with a third game and work on that. And I personally feel like if you're going to have me play through multiple episodes of the game, they need to really swap up the variety of the stages a lot better than they did in this one. And that would be enough to really improve the game itself. Personally, I do love the fact that it does feel a lot like a Castlevania 3. And from that perspective, I think this game is probably one of the more faithful games to the whole legacy of Castlevania 3. And I think it's definitely an enjoyable ride. And I also want to point out, I do feel like the shoot 'em up stage, it was a fun little diversion to do that. But that's pretty much what it felt like at the end of the day. It was just a diversion. I mean, I could have taken it or left it, to be honest with you. But I actually give it bonus props for the shoot 'em up stage. It was an interesting diversion. Let's put it that way, and it was pretty fun. I wasn't a big fan of the fact that it didn't save the game after you got done with the shooting stage, and you had to go straight from that into the final stage of the game. So that was kind of a bummer that they didn't just save it right there. But other than that, it was a nice addition. So anyway, as far as my overall score, I guess I'll be a little more lenient or kind, whatever word you want to use for this game. And I'd say I'd probably give it about a 90% score. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much in my thoughts because I seem to do that a lot of times. But anyway, I think Curse of the Moon 2 is a good game. It's worth playing. And just like the first Curse of the Moon, I do want to point out one thing. Linux performance with Proton is pretty much flawless. You can't go wrong. It worked great on my system. There's only a couple of times I saw a couple of graphical issues where the Inti Creates logo will pop up for like not even half a second, then disappear. But I think that only happened 2, maybe 3 times at the most. And I honestly don't know if that was an issue with Proton or an issue with the game itself. So it may not have been a Proton issue at all. But as far as Linux, this game works, 100% flawlessly. So you can pretty much play it on any platform of your choice, basically. Anyway, thank you again for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.